A bitter strike at a gold mine in Yellowknife tears the community apart. The stage is set for violent confrontation when union men break ranks and cross the picket line. Deep underground, a terrible vengeance is waiting. Can a boot print and a length of fishing line help police solve a baffling and tragic mystery? Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. Men have dug gold from the belly of the earth for thousands of years. They've hoarded it, killed for it, and died for it. Gold promises untold riches, but the promise of gold is seldom kept. Yellowknife in Canada's Northwest Territories, the summer of 1992. The giant gold mine is mired in a bitter strike.
So to get the two sides back to the table, the government...
Friction is heightened when the company decides to keep the mine open by bringing in replacement workers from across the country. Scarcely a day goes by without some violence on the picket line.
But again, nothing was resolved.
The bitter strike drags on for 4 months with no end in sight. The nerves of the local union miners are on edge as they watch their jobs going to men brought in by the company. The union spokesman refused to condemn the violence. The company representatives make no apologies either. They say they're not trying to break the union, they're just trying to break even. As Corporal Randy McBride is quick to find out, compromise is not in the cards.
You were on one side of the fence or on the other. There was no happy medium, no sitting on the fence, and you had to decide either you supported the union or you supported the mine. And those were the only two choices that were available.
Some strikers, bitter from months of unemployment and family pressures, weigh the decision of whether or not to cross the line and return to work.
Well, they come knocking at my door, trying to turn me inside out.
September 18th starts off like many other days of the strike. More union men break ranks and join the company's replacement workers underground.
Black water rising, trying to get the jump on me. It's like a dream come.
Today is one miner's day of decision. He chooses to go back to work.
Feel my ground is shaking.
He knows all the arguments for and all the arguments against. And he knows they have names for people like him.
Black water rising, trying to get the best of me.
He has seen friends become bitter enemies.
Oh, no, not me. I'm gonna be free of your devil ghosts that try to get the best of me.
He has had nightmares about confronting his old union mates on the picket line.
I'm gonna be free of your devil ghosts that try to get the jump on me.
He knows his wife lives in fear, and he shares that fear. Every man who crosses the line has struggled with his conscience.
How many times have I been here? How many times before? Oh, that dark side in my face once more.
Local miners who make the tough decision to defy their union and go back to work must run the daily gauntlet past their former comrades still on the picket line. The mine gate is a flashpoint of anger. Emotions are running high, and violence can erupt at any time. Police try their best to keep the warring sides apart. The tragic result of the strike is that the tight-knit community of Yellowknife is now a divided battlefield. "750 feet below ground, miners leave the turmoil of the strike behind and prepare for a day's work that brings dangers of its own." The mine is a place where men look after each other. Their lives depend on it. Gold is nothing special to these men. It's invisible, hidden inside tons of rock they blast out of the earth every day.
It's like a dream come.
It's a paycheck, not an adventure.
I feel my ground is shaking. Fear crawling up my back. Black water rising up in me. Black water rising, trying to get the best of me.
At 8:45 a.m., the ground shakes. The tremor of the blast catches everyone by surprise. Something is terribly wrong below ground. Blasting is never done at this time of day. News spreads like wildfire. For a miner's wife, this is her worst nightmare. Police are called to the scene.
I was going out the door for coffee at about 20 after 10, and I was a plainclothes member at the time, and one of the uniformed corporals from the Yellowknife detachment grabbed me as I was going out the door and said there'd been an explosion at the mine, and they believed there was several people dead.
People from both sides of the strike gather at the picket line. For those waiting for news, each minute passes like an eternity. RCMP officers, guided by mine managers, enter the mine and descend to the 750-foot level. They don't know what they will find, but they anticipate the worst.
I guess, never having been in a war, I don't know what that was like. But I would think it's probably the closest you could get to mass destruction. There was a smell of burnt flesh in the air once you got right to the scene. There was water everywhere. There were body parts scattered over a pretty wide area. And it was extremely depressing and very frightening. I ended up being left at the scene by myself for about 2 hours because you're in a completely pitch black environment. I was quote-unquote scared shitless. It was the most frightened I've ever been in my life, and I'll never forget it as long as I live.
Ident officers are brought in to examine the terrible aftermath. No one has survived. All 9 miners are dead. No one knows what caused the blast. Jean Vermette is the RCMP post-blast consultant brought in to analyze the scene. It's Vermette's task to determine what caused the explosion and whether it was accidental or deliberate. In the carnage, Vermette's team discovers the remains of 2 blasting caps that may have been used to trigger the explosion. They recover fragments of explosive material which is commonly used in the mine to blast new corridors. They also find several types of electrical wire used to detonate explosives. But then the team finds something that is totally out of place in mine blasting: a length of monofilament fishing line. Exhibit A, a piece of fishing line found right at the blast site. Everything else they have found can be explained as part of normal mining operations, but not this. Its presence points to the use of a tripwire detonator to set off the blast. The bomb expert Vermette speculates that the fishing line was used as a tripwire for the explosion. This was no accident. Someone had deliberately set the blast.
Well, that amount of explosive is to kill. To kill, simple, very simple, it's to kill, to make a big bang, to make sure that everybody knows about it.
For the families of the dead, the pain is unbearable. Police are sure it's murder. But who set the blast and why? In the wake of the tragedy, Yellowknife is tense with fear and confusion, and it's more divided than ever. As if the strike hadn't brought enough pain, now disaster has struck underground.
It was horrible. It was just like everybody blew up. That was a messy night, Dad. Well, you know, went down, everybody was angry, they're angry, we're angry, just...
The explosion happened around 8:45 in the morning in a transportation corridor more than 200 meters underground. A small rail car was taking several miners to a work area when the blast occurred. Everyone in the area was killed.
It's murder, but no one knows who did it.
There was all kinds of theories about what happened, and they were carrying explosives illegally on the man car, and you're not supposed to do that. And the company paid somebody to blow it up to make it look like it was the union. There was all kinds of theories and ideas about what actually happened.
Strikers blame the company blames the strikers. Rumors run rampant, but who really did it and why? The investigative task facing the RCMP is huge. To find evidence of the killer, they must search the sprawling mine property and over 100 miles of tunnels deep in the mine itself. Dan Stevely is the RCMP ident officer called to the scene.
I was requested to attend to an area called the Supercrest headframe, or the Acacho headframe, which could have been a possible point of entry.
The headframe is a large steel structure over a shed which covers a shaft leading down to the mine. The ident team discovers where someone has jimmied open a window in the headframe shed. They find a partial boot print on top of a barrel under the window. Inside the shed, the same prints lead to a ladder, which leads down to the mine itself. Stevely follows the footprint trail down ladders and along tunnels, leading all the way to the 750-foot level of the mine.
We started out along the drift along the 750 level, and in short order we did pick up a pattern, and the pattern, I measured it, it was a similar size, similar pattern that what we had found up above ground.
The tracks are easy to follow because the tread pattern is distinctive. These weren't made by a standard miner's boot.
Actually, what he would have done is entered the Acacho headframe building, opened a doorway and a screen, and then started to climb down to the 425-foot level where he stopped, looked around, would appear, walked back and forth, then climbed down to the 575 level, which is here, again stopped and looked around, and then eventually climbed down to the 750-foot level, did what he had to do, and walked out.
Investigators now know the bomber's route, but not his identity. They need to find him. Those boots could belong to anyone.
We had literally 18,000 suspects. And so we just started the same procedure that you normally do in any type of investigation. You try and figure out the 5 W's and then start talking to people.
Police begin to interview as many strikers and replacement workers as possible. They have to act quickly because they know the first 72 hours are crucial in solving a case. They conduct interviews with everyone who was at the mine or on the picket line in the hours before the explosion: management, union, and replacement workers. Union miners distrust the RCMP, and some even bring union observers to their interviews. Corporal Dale McGowan is one of the RCMP officers assigned to the case.
Anytime you're dealing with labor disputes, you get a lot of emotions and a lot of very heated exchanges and perceptions. And these perceptions carried on right into the investigation, wherein they were very guarded in the information that they gave. Sometimes the people that we were dealing with naturally assumed we had taken a position when we had not. The position of some of the strikers was that they were going to have nothing to do with the police.
Police soon get a promising lead. A mine manager describes seeing a suspicious person on mine property in the pre-dawn hours before the bomb blast.
There was an observation of one individual at about 6 a.m. on the mine property, and this person was walking alone. Through a series of sightings, this same person was seen several times actually on the property. The mine staff that gave us the information gave us a very good description of the person that they saw walking that morning.
The manager says the guy tried to hide his face as he drove by, but still he got a good look at him. He is certain it was a striker named Roger Warren. Warren is an old hand in the mine, a miner's miner, an expert blaster. He's well known in Yellowknife and has worked at the mine for 30 years. The strike has hit him hard, but he has no history of vandalism or violence. McGowan calls Roger Warren in for an interview.
I put it right to him in one of my interviews that it was suspected that he was seen walking. Was that you? And he did identify that it was him.
Well, I turned my face. No, I'll tell you what happened there.
Why was Warren a striker on mine property that night? Why did he hide his face as the manager drove past? Warren says he was simply walking on the road from one picket line outpost to another, as strikers often did. And he says he wasn't hiding his face from the mine manager, he was only blowing his nose. Police asked Warren to bring in the clothes and boots he was wearing the night before the blast. McGowan immediately sees something unusual about the boots.
Those boots were newer boots. Immediately upon seeing them, they really jumped out at me because they had been defaced, in my opinion.
Warren explained the damage to the treads by saying that he had accidentally burned the soles of his boots over a fire grate at the picket line. That made the tread uneven, so he cut away the burnt and melted rubber. The boots are sent over to ident officer Dan Stevely for further analysis. Are these the bomber's boots? Stevely quickly determines that the treads definitely are similar to the boot prints found in the mine. Stevely has already made an impression of the boot prints left by the bomber. He now makes a cast of Warren's boots. This will allow him to compare the tread pattern of the two boots, Warren's and the bomber's.
There was enough tread pattern there to know that, yes, these were of a similar pattern. The size was close, but no, it wasn't matched. And they were actually the wrong size.
Warren's boots are not the ones worn by the bomber. Over the course of several interviews, police find Warren cooperative and helpful. He gives them information that focuses the investigation on new suspects. Warren tells Detective McGowan that the night the mine manager saw him on mine property, he saw two shadowy figures prowling the site.
These two guys are walking like they're going to do something or they've done something.
He says one was a tall man with a bony face. The other was shorter by 4 or 5 inches. Who are these two shadowy figures? And could they be the murderers of the 9 miners? The investigation into the explosion that killed the 9 miners is now several months old. Still no arrests have been made, but authorities have their new lead from Roger Warren. Through repeated interviews, Warren sticks to his story about seeing 2 men by the mine's headframe in the pre-dawn hours before the blast. The investigators have a good idea who these shadowy figures might be. Pat Coughlin and Lonnie Powers, 2 militant strikers who have led a campaign of violence against mine property during the strike. Police believe these men had been involved in 2 explosions prior to the fatal mine blast, including one that blew a hole in a satellite dish on mine property. RCMP officer Al McCambridge is part of the team assigned to investigate Coughlin and Powers. The suspects police call targets 1 and 2.
Information was gleaned through other sources, witness interviews, as well as physical evidence linking target 1 and target 2 to direct involvement in the 2 previous bombings.
But could Coughlin and Powers have found their way to set the bomb in the mine? The giant mine is a confusing maze of tunnels and vertical shafts well over 100 miles long. The bomber or bombers had to be very familiar with the mine to find their way in and out. There aren't many people at the mine with that kind of knowledge. But Pat Coughlin, Target 1, does have that knowledge.
Target 1 was in mine rescue, and therefore he would be, through the course of training and inspections and his operations, would have exposure and access to a great variety of the underground portion of the mines.
Police believe that Coughlin and at least one other man, probably Powers, had penetrated the mine earlier during the strike and painted violent anti-scab graffiti on walls and mine equipment near where the bomb was set. So, led by Coughlin, they could easily have found their way to where the fatal bomb had been planted. But investigators can't reconcile these 2 men setting the bomb with the single set of boot prints found in the mine. Police asked Dan Stevely to recheck his findings.
They wanted to make sure. They would question us almost weekly. Are you sure it's only 1 track? Could it have been? We couldn't say anymore. We couldn't say any more than we had. We weren't going to make up tracks. We weren't going to be able to say, well, maybe. No, there was no maybe in this. We had one person in, 1 foot track in, 1 foot track out.
So if there was only 1 set of boot tracks, which of the 2 suspects could it have been? Police focus on Coughlin, the ringleader of a band of militant strikers. He is widely known as a man who goes looking for trouble. Just 9 days before the fatal blast, Coughlin had been arrested for violence on the picket line. And police learned he was released just 1 day before the bombing. But they don't make much headway with him. He's stonewalling, and he won't take a lie detector test. Then, just as the investigation is zeroing in on Coughlin, police receive startling information that shifts the focus of their investigation to his cohort, Lonnie Powers, Target 2. A striker tells police that 2 weeks before the fatal blast, Powers had approached him with a plan. Powers told him he wanted to build a bomb to blow up a mine truck and driver as they passed over a bridge. The explosives would be triggered by a fish line tripwire. The striker says that when he told Powers he wanted no part of the deadly sabotage, Powers said it didn't matter, that he actually had something bigger in mind anyway. Clearly, Powers is talking tough, but can investigators build their case against him? 7 months after the killings, they raid Powers' house.
It was our belief that Target 2 possessed physical evidence that may link him to the actual murder scene or to some of the previous bomb blasts, and we were hoping to secure that evidence before it was destroyed.
They hit pay dirt, finding a cache of bomb-making supplies in his basement, including detonators and fish line tripwire, just like those used in the fatal blast. Powers obviously has the expertise to build bombs.
Toggle switch, okay, these are specific instruments to create a bomb body. What time did you get home precisely? Do you know what time you got home?
I don't know. I was home before dark.
And upon questioning Powers, police find his alibi for the night before the deadly explosion to be shaky. He says he was parked in front of the TV most of the night, but his wife has told police he was cold when he came to bed, like he'd just come in from outside. With the evidence against him building, police want to arrest Powers for the murder of the miners. But the prosecutor is afraid they won't get a conviction. If they want to build a strong, circumstantial case against Powers, they need to eliminate all remaining suspects.
It's not necessarily in a murder investigation who did it, but who didn't do it.
After almost a year of investigation, police must re-examine Roger Warren's story of seeing the two shadowy figures on mine property in the pre-dawn hours before the blast. And what they will discover will send this tragic case in a totally unexpected direction. It's now been a year since the deadly explosion in the gold mine, and the positions of the union strikers and the mining company are more entrenched than ever. There's still no end in sight to the strike. Both sides continue to hurl blame at each other. Even though they're haunted by the tragedy, some of the widows of the dead men have stayed, hoping to see justice done.
The ones that lost people, like wives, felt sorry for them. You know, they lost something close to them. The rest of us, I guess, we were just fools for fighting and arguing and whatever we were doing.
Investigators have focused on striker Lonnie Powers as their main suspect. He's a militant strike activist, was found with blasting materials, and could have been one of the two shadowy figures Roger Warren says he saw on mine property. But police need to check out Warren's story again to make sure all the pieces fit.
Through the series of interviews that I had taken, of which we had 11 of them all told, he was never adversarial in the initial few interviews. He tried to help us, not to help, but he did provide a great deal of information.
Even though Warren is not a picket line troublemaker and has always cooperated with police, Detective McGowan has nagging doubts about elements of Warren's account. McGowan goes to the spot where Warren claims he saw the two shadowy figures. He studies the site from all angles. Warren could not have seen two figures near the mine road as plainly as he claims to have. There just isn't enough light to see that clearly. Then why would Roger Warren be lying? What is he covering up?
My impression at that point was Mr. Warren was involved in some way. He was either there, he provided information, he was a lookout, or he was directly involved in the setting of that explosion.
McGowan's suspicion that Warren is covering up is supported by further testing on the boots he was wearing that night. Warren had claimed that he burned his boots on the fire and then cut the bottom. But more detailed forensic examination reveals that the treads had been cut first and then burned. McGowan brings Warren in for his 11th interview since the investigation began just over a year ago. He confronts Warren about the boots. Why would he lie about how they were damaged? Warren stands by his story about his boots and about seeing the two shadowy figures.
Look at this. You're driving me to this, you know. I'm on your head.
McGowan just doesn't buy it.
Like this. That's the truth about those goddamn boots.
Realizing he can't crack through Warren's story, McGowan decides to consult with Greg McMartin, an RCMP statement analyst.
I'm a polygraph examiner, but I also analyze statements, verbal or written, for the detection of deception. To understand statement analysis, you have to understand the editing process, and the editing process is something that every person goes through when talking. And a person, when being interviewed, will only tell you what they want you to know, or what they remember, or what they think is important, or what they think you, the interviewer, thinks is important, and then the rest they will leave out. And that makes every word that the person says is important. A truthful person will give a statement where the statement will flow, and it will maintain a fairly regular pace. Roger Warren's statement, he slowed the pace of the statement down. Where it was slowed down, it contained a lot of unimportant information. So from reading Roger Warren's statement and understanding that every word that he says was important, it became very, very obvious that the story Roger Warren was telling, he was not committing himself to that story. And if a person cannot commit themselves to it, then we should not have total belief in what that person is saying.
McMartin believes that Warren is embroidering an elaborate fabric of lies, but he cannot determine what is being concealed or why. He talks to investigators and digs deeper through Warren's interview transcripts.
After spending a week in Calgary going over statements, I then went to Yellowknife and spent another week. I was in a little room with a rickety old Coke machine, and I poured over and over statements.
He begins to see the case in a new light and shares his hunch with fellow investigators.
There's one point in one of the statements that Roger Warren gave where he is describing the two people that he saw on the mine property. And Roger Warren at that point is talking in future tense. He's not telling us what is in his memory and what he was thinking or what he was going to do, but is describing something that he would do in the future. He describes the people as, I know one seemed a few inches taller than the other, but like as far as heights go, I don't know. He's telling us things that he does not know and not describing what it is that he does know.
Analyzing all of Warren's interviews has led McMartin to believe that Warren is engaged in much more than simple deception. And McMartin has a hunch about the identity of the killer. He believes it's Roger Warren.
It was, what do you mean you think he's the one? You think that Warren is responsible? I said, yes, sir, I do. And there was a bit of a pause, and then it was just, well, good luck.
To prove his theory, he wants to bring Warren in for one last interview. But this time, police will construct their own deception. A mountain of evidence that is designed to intimidate Warren before the statement analyst meets him face to face. Could the man police have been relying on for information and leads actually be the bomber they've been pursuing for so long? Roger Warren is not one of the militants on the picket line, and police have no evidence against him. But statement analyst Greg McMartin believes Roger Warren is the lone bomber. How can he prove it? He believes he can get a confession out of Warren, without which the case against him won't stand up in court.
It was almost a no-win situation in that if Roger Warren did not confess to it, I don't know if anybody would have really gone along with me that he was responsible for the murder.
With investigators' help, McMartin has set the stage for his interview with Warren. They have placed boxes of evidence around the room to make it appear they have a strong case against him. Warren is left waiting outside the interview so he can absorb the impact of the so-called evidence.
I placed him in the interview room. I went in and I gave him a preamble, which is, I gave him his legal rights, as we did with everybody. And then I introduced Greg McMartin.
I then said to Roger that I know that he has said his story 100 times before, but I've never heard it, and could he please tell it to me again?
Warren tells his story about the night before the explosion and the two shadowy figures.
When he was finished, I told him outright I did not believe him. I did not believe his story about the two people that were on the mine property. And I then told him that he was the person that was responsible for the murder. He set the bomb, that it's no longer who did it. It becomes a question of now, why did you do it? And the first words out of his mouth were, if you're so sure it's me, why aren't you arresting me? And I took that as a confession, because he didn't swear at me. He didn't tell me I was wrong after accusing him of murdering 9 people.
After an hour and a half, Warren suddenly stands up and walks out, saying he has to go pick up his daughter.
I thought at that particular point we had lost him, but I told Roger that I had some things that I wanted to tell him and things that he would probably want to hear, which perked his attention, and he told me that he would be back.
The man who holds the key to solving the murder of 9 miners is gone, and there's nothing police can do to force him back. True to his word, Warren returns an hour later to finish the interview. The climax of this tragedy is about to play out behind the closed doors of an RCMP interview room. Under continuing pressure from McMartin, Warren begins to crack. The investigator challenges Warren to be a man and get the heavy burden of the murders off his conscience. At last, Roger Warren tells the entire story of how he set the bomb and created the deception of the 2 shadowy figures to cover his own tracks. Police still don't trust Warren. They think he could be covering up for someone.
Roger was very passionate in his beliefs, and I wanted to make sure that if he was saying that he was involved, that he actually had the proof and the intimate knowledge to say it was, in fact, him. I then asked him if he would assist me in conducting a reenactment to actually go into the mine, to go underground. And this would shore up in my mind that if he's saying and he's telling me that he went into the mine and did certain things, could he follow up in actual demonstration and deed as opposed to just talking about it? And this would really shore up the fact that he was in fact involved and not just hearing stories.
In his reenactment of the crime, Warren recounts events that only the killer could know and which match perfectly with the evidence found at the scene a year earlier. Warren shows police the exact route he took through the mine leading right to the blast site. It was just as described by forensic ident officer Stevely.
The way we had it, the scenario was right on. That was a great feeling. That was putting that icing on the cake, that we had done our job. We did it to the best of our ability.
Warren then takes police to a lake outside of Yellowknife, where he had disposed of some key pieces of evidence. He tells police he had 2 similar pairs of boots and shows them where he threw the actual pair he had worn the night he set the blast. These turn out to be a perfect match to the boot tracks found in the mine.
They essentially cut it in half, opened it up, and the tracks were perfect. The boots were right there.
Police also get him to show where he had disposed of his bomb-making supplies. A switch, batteries for a detonator, and the rest of the fishing line he used as tripwire. They finally know Warren is the right man, and they can prove it in court. Combining Warren's story with the forensic evidence, police are now confident they have pieced together the deadly sequence of events that led to the death of 9 miners in the depths of the giant mine. Warren was on mine property in the pre-dawn hours before the blast, and he did turn away to hide his face. Warren did make his way through the head shaft and down to the 750-foot level. He then used his years of blasting experience to set the bomb and rig it to explode with a tripwire made of fishing line. And he knew how much explosives to use to accomplish his deadly goal. But what would drive Roger Warren to such extreme measures? He was fed up with the strike, and he was convinced he could help end it. He believed the strikebreakers were prolonging the conflict, and in some twisted way, he believed that setting the bomb which sent the 9 miners to their deaths would bring the warring sides together once and for all.
I don't know why he did it. I couldn't speculate why he did it. Did he just crack? And just get so mad that he had to do what he done? Like, I mean, it's one thing to punch a guy in the head, but it's another thing to kill him.
Roger Warren is charged with 9 counts of first-degree murder.
At trial, Roger Warren recants his confession, but the evidence against him is overwhelming. A jury convicts Warren on 9 counts of second-degree murder. He is sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 20 years.
Roger Warren had no feelings for those miners, that they were, in his words, scabs. He's cold, he's calloused, he had no emotion at all. He meant to kill those people.
In the heat of a bitter strike, 9 men lost their lives. 9 families were shattered and the community was broken. The memory of the tragic strike and murders will haunt the town of Yellowknife forever. The stories on Exhibit A are based on true cases. The forensic scientists and investigators are the actual individuals who worked on the cases. The names of the victims are fictitious. The names of the guilty are real.
Well, they come knocking at my door, trying to turn me inside out. I tell me with some more. Black water rising up in me. Black water rising, trying to get the jump on me.